Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to open this event on behalf of the Department of Architecture and to welcome you all to the launch of ETH Studio Basel Open Access. It is an honor for me, but also a little strange to speak here. Because Studio Basel began at a time when I personally had just completed my architecture studies and, like all my fellow students, was looking to Switzerland with interest and curiosity. The future of architecture seemed to be negotiated and developed here. And of course, the names of the big Basel architecture offices were all around. At that time, the architects were prophets for us, who knew what good and true architecture is. Well, we all know one of the main problems with prophets. They don't always go to the mountain. Sometimes you have to bring the mountain to them, especially if it's called Höngerberg. And so it was when Roger Dina, Jacques Herzog, Marcel Meili and Pierre Demeron came to ETH almost exactly a quarter of a century ago. It was clear from the start, and perhaps not so surprising, that they did not want to teach at Höngerberg. What was more surprising, however, was that they did not primarily want to teach architecture, but, together with Christian Schmid, to do urban research. For this, they founded Studio Basel on invitation of the then president of ETH. In the first few years, Studio Basel explored the question, what is urban Switzerland? The urban researchers conducted interviews throughout Switzerland, took photos and drew many colorful maps, which only a few malicious tongues claimed to be paint by numbers. Their research culminated in the 2005 publication Die Schweiz, ein städtebauliches Porträt, which caused a lot of discussion because it changed our perception of Switzerland and dispelled old myths of the land of Heidi. Of course, not everyone liked this. The introduction of the term Alpine wasteland, Alpine Brache, for example, caused criticism in the mountain regions in particular and shows how Studio Basel research initiated and helped shape the debate about Switzerland's self-image. This first publication was followed by a research program dealing with the transformation of cities and urbanizing territories worldwide. The regions studied included the Canary Islands, the development of the tri-national Basel region, the effects of migration flows in Nairobi, the territorial dimension of urban development in the Nile Valley, Florida and Muscat, as well as the spatial and urban effects of food production and consumption. In this context, more publications emerged that have been and continue to be the subject of further discussions. Examples include the Metro Basel comic from 2009, the inevitable specificity, horrible word, I really had to train that, I don't repeat it, of cities in 2014, and Achtung die Landschaft in 2016. ETH Studio Basel closed its doors in 2018, but of course, this does not mean that the research is not continued, like, for example, at the Future Cities Laboratory, among others. The publications of Studio Basel still play an important role in architecture and urban research. My chair, for example, just recently referenced them in one of our research proposals on Baukultur in der Provinz. Unfortunately, some of the books are now out of print, including the Urban Planning Portrait of Switzerland. There is still one copy in my office, and until now I had to be careful that it does not disappear, like many of my other books, due to more or less permitted borrowing by staff and students. Thanks to open access, I now have less to fear. Global urban research was conducted from Basel. Now the results of Studio Basel are accessible also globally. This means that the many years of research can be continued and also developed further. Dear Roger, Christian and Jacques, as well as the whole team of Studio Basel and all its students, thank you very much for your impressive work.
Well, dear friends, dear colleagues, it's such a great pleasure for me to welcome everybody of you here in this room, some of which I haven't seen for quite a long time. And it's really a great pleasure to bring this fantastic project that I think was really an extraordinary project and a quite unique project to a kind of a conclusion. No? I mean, there is no conclusion of such projects, but there should be a moment where we bring together everybody again and where we bring together also all the publications and the work we did and have a short moment of reflection about what we did. So this was one of my last, this is actually my last, was my last kind of project during my tenure. I will have more projects later, but during my tenure, this was my idea. We have to do that, and together with Milica Topalović, the two kind of, well, I mean, remaining members of Studio Basel at ETH. There are also more, but as professors. So that was the moment to organize this event and to organize this kind of project. So I think to understand Studio Basel and the importance of that project is to think about how it started. And it started not with a method, it started not with a theory, it started not with an approach, it started with a question. And that, I think, for me as a kind of a scientist, I mean, that's the most scientific way to start a project. You have a question, a real question. What is urban Switzerland? And then you sit together and then you start with the research and then you find ways to answer that question. And on the way of finding this answer, we somehow developed a whole range of things. We developed a kind of a strategy to analyze entire territories. We analyzed an analytical framework to somehow grasp analytically urbanization as networks, borders, and differences. We developed a cartography as an analytical instrument, not just as an illustration, but as an analytical instrument for this whole project. And in fact, we didn't start to write that book before we hadn't finished all the maps. So in fact, the book was hanging, I think it's a famous picture, was hanging all over the studio. The whole book was there, all the images were there, all the maps were there, and then we started to write the texts. So the texts are somehow just an explanation of the maps. We developed also a typology of urban territories, at the example of Switzerland. We further developed a kind of a way to not only analyze, but also represent and somehow define urban configurations in developing this kind of method of superimposing of layers instead of just making lines, but to show how multifaceted and multidimensional urbanization processes are. And finally, we also developed a kind of a systematic approach of comparative analysis, because of course we needed to compare the different urban configurations we identified in order to develop that typology. So you see, this is a whole range of methods, procedures and instruments that we developed in these 5 years of that project. And I think this is an amazing result. And I can tell you from my position today, I can tell you that, I mean, this kind of analysis didn't exist before we somehow developed it. No, we can say that because you can look in the literature, you can look in the books, and you don't find this type of analysis of a encompassing analysis of urban territories. It was really a completely new approach in doing this kind of things. And that then somehow evolved in a, again, very interesting way. So after the Switzerland project, we had a bit enough from Switzerland actually, and then the idea was, okay, now can we use the things we learned and developed also for other territories? And then we went to very different places, starting with Naples. And again, I think it was absolutely great move to start with Naples. It was an idea to say, so what kind of cities should we analyze? Not the spectacular one, not the trendy ones, not the global cities. No, we would like to analyze. Later, the term came up, and it will come in the discussion, ordinary cities. Cities that are interesting, that have their own way of urbanity, but are not on the radar of the international debates. And so Naples became somehow the symbol of this kind of approach. And then it followed and followed. And again, through these different places we analyzed, we developed further urban theory and the way to analyze urban territories. And again, we had a kind of a theoretical framework that we further developed. It started with territory. We looked on the physical aspects of these places. Vesuvius, the volcano, urbanization that somehow approaches the volcano. We looked at the Nile Valley and a kind of a linear oasis in the desert and how that linear oasis was urbanized. And then we looked on, in a second level, on power. And again, I think a quite interesting way to analyze how power is incorporated into the territory. And we had great examples, Belgrade, Nairobi, and Hong Kong for that. And developed a kind of idea of what we could today call a kind of territorial, a kind of territorial way to analyze the planning process and the kind of the power geometries that define these territories and define the future of these territories. And then we looked on the differences, a term that became already very important in the Swiss portrait, and looked how these territories are somehow really composed by these differences, and that in very different ways. And then in a last phase that went forward with an approach that was fully based on these insights and these concepts under the term now territory. We analyzed huge territories. I mean, so where the term territory really makes full sense. Huge, vast areas, for instance, starting in Rome, going over the Apennine to the Adriatics. I mean, a territory that spans several hundred kilometers. And then we continued that with a section of Florida, with the Red River Delta, with Muscat and Oman, and finally with Belo Horizonte. Huge territories that we analyzed as a kind of combination of different, you could say, occupations by the urbanization processes, from densely settled areas, from city core, even from metropolises, up to quite peripheral areas that we then somehow approached. Today we call these territories territories of extended urbanization, and we thought these processes together. So all in all, you see that out of this collective we could say, efforts and this enthusiasm that was so important for Studio Basel, we developed really a kind of an approach that still has a great value today. And, so we discussed that now in the next 2 hours or so, and we have the following contributions. First, Milica Topalović will present our project of the website and of the open access of all these books and publications. Then Roger Diener will have a short talk in memoriam Marcel Meili, who was such an important figure in Studio Basel and such a dear friend to me, but to many others too. And then we open up the discussion with 3 roundtables, and we will see how these roundtables unfold. After the first roundtable, each roundtable has 45 minutes. After the first roundtable, there will be a short break, and then we have the other 2 roundtables. We should finish here at about 7, and there will be an apéro for everybody. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Silke. Thank you, Christian, for looking back, for opening the day. Thank you, Roger and Jacques, for being here. Thank you, friends, collaborators, students. Thank you all. It's such a great pleasure to see you all and to be here today together. So I'd like to say a few words about the idea of open access publishing. Why open access to Studio Basel's publications? I can start with an interesting coincidence which we learned about while developing this project. Studio Basel closed its doors in 2018, the same year when ETH Zurich, after a lot of discussion, revised its publishing policy in favor of giving open access to as many scientific publications as possible. I start with a brief quote from that policy document. ETH Zurich advocates that the knowledge generated by its researchers should enjoy as much barrier-free accessibility as possible. It is convinced that global open access to knowledge improves and accelerates academic discourse, encourages transparency in the academic system and good scientific practice, and increases the visibility of both individual researchers and the ETH Zurich. As a public research and education institution funded by the Swiss Confederation, ETH Zurich holds the firm view that knowledge must be provided at appropriate cost for ETH Zurich that are in reasonable proportion to the services of the publishing houses. ETH Zurich therefore supports open access movement. These well-measured sentences, for those of you that remember, came as a conclusion of a heated debate around high publishing fees and paywalls behind which much of academic work was concealed or hard to access at the time. Studio Basel also worked partly within that old publishing paradigm, in which publication copyrights were handed over to publishers, and books were mostly printed physically in limited edition, with consequence that many key publications went out of print over the years and were simply no longer available. The costs of printed books were too high for many, for our own students, and even more so for collaborators and students in other countries and areas we researched. Distribution presented an additional issue, owing to the character of distribution networks in which our publishers operated, and those were the kind of general conditions that still endure. Some of the books were circulated primarily in Switzerland and Germany, More attractive publications were also found across Western Europe and North America, rarely Australia and Japan. Here we encounter the paradox that several books, such as, for example, Belgrade Formal Informal and Nairobi, Migration Shaping the City, could actually not reach the context that they were speaking about. They were not available for sale in places that they were describing. Since 2018, the way we read has also changed. All of us have become much more of digital readers, and ETH has become more active and conscious about the value and impact of its digital research collection. However, also on this digital track, we were delayed for a long time with Studio Basel's publications, as we did not have open access contracts. Thus, even though many books were out of print, as you heard, and many people approached us over the years to request copies or PDFs, we did not have legal permission to place PDFs online and to circulate them. So this is a background story. But in the last years, we worked to find solutions. The mentalities have changed, the ideas around publishing have changed, and we are grateful for help and support we received from our publishers. Birkhäuser, of course, Lars Müller, Scheidegger & Spies, Park Books, Nigli Verlag, Verlag NZZ, GTA Verlag, and Das Magazin, in this case, were all on board to make this open access collection possible. So it is my great pleasure to unveil today this wonderful website. You can also access it through your devices, the new public collection, Studio Basel Open Access. I kindly ask Moritz to bring us to the web channel. So here it is. A very simple structure with the introduction to the research collection with 20 of the most important publications that are organized in certain categories, key publications, city portraits, publications dealing with Switzerland, and publications in the Territory series. When you go to the specific books, you will find something like this. A book that is especially dear and precious to me. Belgrade has been out of print for 8 years, and since yesterday we have it online again. It's really a great moment, and you can download a beautiful PDF and also access the book in the research collection. And I emphasize a beautiful PDF because it's not a bad scan. It is really, truly a pleasure to look at those pages. So, so I also want to say that you will find books that were rare by design, such as Fünf Orte, that Marcel Miley worked together with Günther Vogt. This book is now also available, and I think that most people actually have never even seen the physical print. We don't have it, our students. And then, of course, the big publications such as the Swiss Portrait with the collaboration from Birkhäuser, we are also able to have this, I would, if I may call it, a kind of a luxurious online edition with also this wonderful thesis map available in all its details. What you can also find of the website is the link to the original website of the Studio Basel. This website is no longer maintained, but it offers all of its resources, so it cannot be modified, but everything is fully accessible, and especially the deep archives and teaching materials and student works. Studio Basel team over the years is here, and also in the imprint, I would like to mention and thank our designers, Benziger Hug, for design and programming, and especially our editors, Nancy Cooling and Dorothee Hahn, for working on this collection. Also, other collaborators named here who supported this event. In the end, I would also like to say that we are happy that this way of presenting publications goes beyond what I believe is currently the common standard of digital publishing. There is a kind of a certain catalog aesthetics which can be monotonous. Here, publications are together, showing intellectual context, linkages, and development of ideas over time, and allowing for a richer reading. During the development of this project, we also became excited about the possibility of this way of bringing together publications. I hope that this approach can inspire, perhaps in the first place, Department of Architecture to take it up and give open access to hundreds of valuable books and publications over the years, contributing to visibility and accessibility of the department. And with this collection, I would also like to thank once again the entire Studio Basel for enjoyable journey, for friendship, and for working together. I wish you all great use of this collection, good reading, and I hope it will help you in your studies, practice, and teaching. Thank you very much. Thank you. And as you know, in 2018, Studio Basel suffered a great loss with the passing of Marcel Miley. This celebration and this gathering is not the same without him. I'm grateful to Roger, who is with us, who will speak in the memory of Marcel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's take a moment to remember Marcel Miley, who has done so much for the ETH Studio Basel and has been an important researcher and teacher at this faculty. In 1985, at the beginning of his writing on architecture, Marcel wrote an article on the architectural impact of serial precast building elements. At the time, Marcel worked as a young architect in the office of Dolf Schneble and Tobias Ammann. It became a key text on the identity of a new contemporary Swiss architecture, the ouverture to a unique reflection on the structure of research-based design. Even before starting his own practice together with Markus Peter in 1987, Marcel had become an important voice in Swiss architectural discourse. Marcel Miley and Markus Peter have been researching, designing, publishing, and teaching since 1987. They focus on the fundamental questions of architecture. Aspects of the building industry and production methods are also discussed and flow into their designs. Not only their theoretical contributions, but also their buildings soon became the result of unique research. They have made an invaluable contribution to contemporary architecture far beyond the borders of Switzerland. It is not only his knowledge of the history and theory of architecture, but also Marcel's great knowledge of the humanities and his endless scientific curiosity that have made him a unique teacher. He not only placed his research at the service of his own architectural production, he not only enriched himself with the treasure of his knowledge and insight, but he also involved others, he involved us in this process. This attitude had a two-way effect. For his own authorship, it meant renouncing a decidedly personal language and gestural design. Marcel did not seek the aura of an artist-architect that so many architects have. For students and staff, his disclosure of design processes has become an invaluable guide, a source of insight into the possibilities of constructing one's own design as research. I remember his fondness for the annual football tournament organized by the Architekturmuseum Basel. It was a special moment in 1998 when, in between games and in our sweaty jerseys, we conceived the idea of the ETH Studio Basel with Jacques and Pierre. Marcel envisioned the studio not as just another research facility, but as an escape from the institutional constraints of the university, and to become a sort of garage, as he said, an unconventional space fostering an interplay for knowledge production. That means research. As part of Switzerland, an Urban Portrait, published in 2005, Marcel wrote a history of the Swiss territory. He was in a protagonist position, and he did not hesitate to put forward the provocative thesis on Switzerland, never hesitating to lead the debate in front of a skeptical public. He was in dialogue with other researchers, with actors and political representatives. Marcel did not spare himself. It was during this period that his wife Eva died. With unparalleled commitment, Marcel resumed his research and produced interdisciplinary work, including documentaries with students in Casablanca in collaboration with Christoph Schaub. Previously, in 1995, he had made that poetic film with Christoph Schaub on the Villa Girasole, that fabulous monument for the late Futurismo period. For the last 3 years, Marcel has been teaching with Jürg Konzett and Günther Vogt a concentration of the essential: architecture, landscaping, construction. Günther Vogt had also designed Marcel's roof garden, a large field of plants. Marcel loved it. His reflections became indispensable in this department. Intellectual acumen paired with great tolerance and kindness opened up new perspectives. Marcel was unique in his ability to open doors and introduce new ways of looking at things in a way that no one else was able to do so. Thank you.
Okay, well, we start now with the first roundtable, and I have to, well, unfortunately, we had on this podium also Pierre Demeron, and he just had to renounce today for health reasons. Nothing dramatic, but he just couldn't join us today. And so Pierre Demeron will not be on that roundtable, but Jacques Herzog will join us. And then Emanuel Christ, Matthias Gunz, Metaxia, Markaki, Ann-Sofi Rönnskog, and Günther Vogt, please come to the table, or to the round table, or to the round. You find your names, and Jacques, you can sit here. Mhm. Ja, du bräuchtest natürlich auch so eins, ja.
Was?
Ja. Okay, so this roundtable is about the Swiss portrait and its effects. So I think for the audience here in Switzerland, this kind of project somehow fall out of a blue sky. It was a moment where old planning doctrines somehow came to their limits, and at that very moment we had the idea, or we started to somehow question this kind of the planning concepts that were repeating themselves all over Switzerland, and to think about how can we imagine a different concept, a different representation, spatial representation of Switzerland. And started, as I said in the introduction, without a plan, without a theory, without a method, but with a huge experiment. And this experiment became more and more successful. There was more and more interest in it. And at the moment when we published the Swiss Portrait, well, we were very lucky that das Magazin, the weekly supplement from Tagesanzeiger, decided to make a special issue on our book. And one Saturday morning, people in Zurich, Bern, Solothurn, Basel had our Swiss Portrait in the form of that supplement on their kitchen table. So that was then a moment when a real debate started about the question of what is urban Switzerland. Now, my first question, and I will introduce the different participants step by step. My first question goes to Jacques. I mean, this is now almost 20 years. 19 years ago, we published that book. And if you are looking back to these results, and you think about what we developed, what is your impression? What is your kind of assessment of that project?
Hello, everybody. I joined Roger's mourning for Marcel. And as you said, Roger, this started between us as an idea because we have been asked to become professors at the ETH. And I was not so very keen to do this. I had been teaching for 10 years or more in Harvard, where we could do whatever we wanted and whenever we wanted. So I didn't want to go to Zurich in a traditional way to teach. And but it would be nice to do something with friends from our generation, of course, Roger, but also Marcel, who were more or less at the same time at the ETH as students. And we also didn't want to teach architecture because I saw this as a private research, which was painful enough. So I did also not know exactly what should I tell the students to do in a conventional way. But we wanted to know more. And as you said, Christian, the beginning was a question. And in fact, it started, for Pierre and me, it started more than 10, maybe 15 years before, because we had been for many years closely working together with artists, especially with, at that time, Rémi Zaug. And so the first project we've done in that field with this method of looking and not knowing was a comprehensive study of Metropolitan Basel with the title Basel, eine Stadt im Werden, ? So the question mark was even part of the title. And that method of looking, and naively looking, because those who knew Rémi know that he was always questioning, it was very scared of biases and you know, the kind of assurance that at that time when we started was especially spread by postmodernist theory and by especially Rem Koolhaas's texts, which I saw mostly as a kind of a frivolous comments, and that all together was, so to speak, the intellectual but also the motivation that drove us to this project. So the ETH Studio Basel, as a project, as a fact that it came to existence outside here, outside the Hönkeberg or outside ETH Zentrum, was motivated by what I just explained. And it was also motivated by our question about what actually is Switzerland in terms of, between territory, city, all these questions that then became more known during all these years. It was a painful time. We have been working very hard. We have been working with a lot of fun at the beginning. When Christian and Marcel came to Basel, we always enjoyed going for lunch together. We had really, really long discussions together as a group. So this was really unique in that sense and was very touching because we, of course, spoke about our problems we had in our mutual offices, what we learned, what we read, what we saw, what we experienced in Switzerland. So the beginning was very much based on that exchange. And that I keep, and come back to your question, in a very good memory. That was something I can only recommend, that, things happen in groups. So it was a collaboration without being named a collaboration. Whatever we discussed came out of these early beginnings and this early initiative that we wanted to do something different from the conventional teaching and learning. And we can come back to the content later, but what I think is interesting for the younger ones here, we all know more about Switzerland in the meantime. We all know that Switzerland became much more of an urbanized territory in a way that almost like one city with different topographical places, but we never saw it as, that was a parallel theory, I think, Switzerland as a city. Yeah. Yeah. But in some way, it has a bit gone that way, So when we ask ourselves what became true and what changed and what is something we look at and see now in a different way, it would be interesting to again go more into details in the different fields that the book has, especially also what you mentioned about Brache, wasteland. It was, for instance, quite strange that we had hardly published a book that Saviri announced his project for Andermatt, which was really in the heart of one of the Brache and turned into a quite successful resort, whether you like it or not. So, well, that we may discuss these things further, but I think now many things that we discuss, many things about the metropolization of the main political and especially economic centers has become true, has become more intensely so. Globalization and the success, migration has made Switzerland even more what we projected to some degree, and I think a lot of our content has become integrated in federal planning. I think that's probably the most astonishing thing, that academic work has been accepted by the state unwillingly, not formally accepted, but if you look at the detail of the Raumplanung, it is very close to what we proposed in our Karten.
Okay, thanks. We will go back to that point. I would like to ask Emanuel Christ. I mean, the Studio Basel was always presented, or often presented, as a studio of 4 architects. Then it was somehow accepted there was also a geographer and sociologist on board. But there was also an assistant on board, and that was Emanuel Christ. And you somehow kept this group together, no? So some of you only, I mean, Jacques and Pierre, you taught in the autumn semester, Marcel and Roger in the spring semester, and you were there all the time, no? So you kept actually this studio together because there was no other person around that could somehow manage all these different students and their interests and their questions. So what is your view on this process, and what is your kind of take on the results we achieved? Because you were absolutely key in developing these results.
Thank you, and hi everyone. Maybe I prepared a few notes just to help my memory. Actually, as it was said, there was this romantic idea by the founders to be absolutely anti-institutional. And part of that dream was no assistance. And after one semester, you seemingly found out it might be practical to still have an assistant. And my role, according to Pierre, when he asked me to become an assistant, he said, it's certainly nothing to do with content, just looking after the place, literally changing a light bulb when needed. And then you asked me in the preparation, how did I experience the research process, that I at least could observe from my position. And on a serious note, I remember it as fundamental research in its maybe purest possible form. And you said it, Christian, in your introduction. It was really asking questions. It was observing, and also it was an invention at the time, at least I think for the students and for me, that these observations, they happened in a precisely defined framework, which was called eine Bohrung, so drilling or a borehole. And then, after asking the question and describing and observing, then came describing. And that's important too. It was describing in words and in drawings and discussing. And Jacques said it, endless discussions actually. And I remember these very long and often quite relaxed discussions as the most inspiring and fascinating moments of my early career in Studio Basel. Jacques, Marcel, Pierre and Roger just talking. It never seemed to be very serious or heavy. There was always wit and a sparkling sense of humor. it was rather a very engaged form of small talk, I'm tempted to say. At least an easy conversation, it seemed to me. Of course, it's my naivete who made me believe it was that innocent. And therefore, Studio Basel days had the light-hearted and therefore very inspiring and mind-opening nature of holidays almost. If there, I should say, wouldn't have been Christian, who once in a while brought the seriousness of substantial and partly heavy theory back into the conversation. It was Lefebvre, whom I heard for the first time. And I should also say, Pierre was constantly making drawings while the others were talking. And it was in this constellation that maybe a new method of researching the territory and the city was created, or perhaps one could say recreated after the somewhat dull decades of technocratic ORL planning here at ETH. So describing and discussing what you see while condensing it into a drawing, until this drawing starts to look like a plan for the future. And as a last part of this, remembering early days of Studio Basel, all this, the conversation, the discussion, the testing a new method was very generously shared with all the students from the very beginning. And my role then eventually became maybe the go-between. I could help the students to look carefully and to translate their observations into a coherent story. That was very important. So choosing the right words and to build up a coherent argument was somehow the teaching, which turned out to be the research at the same time. And once in a while, I changed a light bulb.
Well, yes, I mean, what both of you say, and I can really share this experience. I mean, it was a very turbulent time, or a turbulent kind of way to teach and to research. For me, it was really impressive and very satisfying. You know, I like this kind of type of open engagement, and I have to say that everybody was really fully involved into that project. And just one small episode. So one day, Pierre Demeron came to me and said, "Yeah, this Lefebvre. Could you give me a book that you could recommend?" And I gave him The Urban Revolution. And on his way to Harvard, and on his way back, he read that book. And then he presented his kind of summary of that book. And so you see, I mean, this is really a full engagement. So on that basis, we could really progress. And as a collective project, as a searching for convergence in our work. Now, we have a third kind of témoin du temps, which is Ann-Sofi Rönnskog. Today you are a researcher and teacher in London, and at the time you became an assistant at Studio Basel at the moment when we started to work on the book. So there was a phase of 3 years where we did the research and the studios, and then in the 4th year, if I remember well, we turned into the production of basically maps. And as I said at the beginning, at the end of that process, we had the entire book with hundreds of maps on the wall. Now, one of your key jobs was to work on those maps. And I remember particularly one map that we at the end never published, but we did still somehow on the cover of the book, which is a very complex map with, I think, about 50 different layers that were kind of overlapped, and to somehow show the differences that evolved in this country. So what was your experience with this work, and how do you see from your position today the methods and also the results we achieved?
Well, thank you very much, Christian and Milica, for pulling this event together. It's really fun to talk about this portrait. And I must say, I realized quite early on that Studio Basel was not there to design the chess players or the strategy of the chess. They were there to design the chessboard again. So it was really fun for me as a Finnish student to come to Switzerland and engage with professors that were going to talk about the whole country. That was new to me and totally fascinating. And the other thing that really fascinated me, that there was a pure ignorance to administrative borders. They were not important, so you could look beyond them. And which urban planning or modern planning was the key was the administrative borders, and we just ignored them. So I was very much on the drawing board of the Swiss maps, and for years, therefore, very, very many versions. And it was, for me, a big exercise or understanding of form finding more than anything else. And form finding that went well beyond the center very morphologies that were elsewhere. And it was overlay of transparencies, of taking the outcomes of the student works and putting them together in one image from many years, or 150 student work, and look at them and compare them and make them equal in this, or enhance them. And at the same time as these sketches or drawings or forms were there, we were supporting it with statistical maps, and form finding just also pure from the topography of Switzerland. And in the statistics, we tried to figure out different forms and shapes again in order to tell an analysis of that area. Maybe they spoke less English in the Stille Zone or so on. So everything was a very creative process of finding forms to these typologies that were created and talked about and resketched every week. And until there were finally these potentials on a map, the potentials for Switzerland, which was the map that was published in large. And I think it was an amazing process to see an overlay on the Swiss topographical map, because that's what we were doing. We were overlaying on the lay of the ground, the different shapes and sketches. And for me, a big takeaway is that you can make up that method as you go along, and still also always ask the question. I think that's the biggest part. And that's what I've been doing with John Palmesino, who will be in the last roundtable, as Territorial agency for the last 20 years, since the portrait came out. And I would like to also put on the table that today is a completely different situation where we are in. We can maybe not so easily draw on this background of topography because we have entered into the Anthropocene, where we are, where these 20 last year has been a furious and fast process of great acceleration of everything human has done to the Earth and the Earth systems, and now we are the geological force. So in that sense, these Alps that we took as for granted on the topographical map are coming back to us at this moment. So we need a much more form finding today when it comes to our territories. I just wanted to put that on the table. The method is needed again.
Thank you. Yes, this kind of key aspect of the topography. I mean, for us, it was absolutely a central point if we think about Switzerland and particularly, of course, the Alps. And I mean, just to understand what happens when you map. I mean, one of our rules was that white is not allowed. No. White means we didn't do the research. So the goal was, okay, you have to find an expression and a definition for each part of the territory. And that led to the detection of the, it was somehow a discovery for us of what we then called the Alpine fallow lands, no? And well, it was because there was a white spot on that map in the middle of Switzerland, and we, at a certain moment, we started to think, well, what is that? And then we had a closer look at it, and then we started to design it, in fact. And then we somehow came up with that category. Now,
maybe
yeah.
I can interrupt briefly. I think, Ann-Sofi, if I understand you, mentioned something which is speaking about where are we today, and the mountains and the fallow land, as you said, those areas which in winter don't have snow anymore, and you can go higher and higher and higher. So that part of Switzerland is the one that has changed more dramatically than any other part, and is today, as much as I like that our studies have become like almost federal, not law, but federal vision, it needs another vision, a more dramatic vision. Yeah. You know, this today is not the topic for this day, but this is something that worries me much more than where is this study that we did 20 years ago now.
Yeah. How this was just a question.
No,
sorry.
I'm just saying that the fallow land and the mountains have a potentially transformative force that is enormous, and Switzerland is not able and willing to really tackle that, you know. That the glaciers are going, and we do nothing to, not to save them, that's another story, but to do something in place, to be more active, you know, in planning. So this is something that we couldn't have known. We couldn't have known in such a dramatic way as today. I don't know, Ann-Sofi, whether you wanted to go this way in your speech, but that's something that eventually we can speak about sometime later.
No, now, because this was exactly my next question. And my question was to Günther Vogt, who is, of course, a very good friend of us. You accompanied us in all those years. You also then made a book together with Marcel, 5 Orte, 5 places. And you became one of our main advocates and defenders against all those who criticized us, who criticized us heavily because of that term, the Alpine fallow land. And you did a lot of research just recently on these territories and on this question.
Good evening. Yes, you are right. So, finally, for 20 years now, I'm defending the ETH Studio Basel, constantly explaining fallow land is not the vision of the Studio Basel, it's describing a process. And the bad news, it's still going on. And then you are heavily criticized. And we took it over, and in the last semester, first with Marcel and your concept, and afterwards I did it with Thomas Kissling and Markus Ritter. We went very close, so we took this aspect of the fallow land really serious, and we went, like you did, the method of drilling to go closer, valley for valley. Instead of landscape, we used the term Talschaft, valleyscape, and we really went really close. So, and what changed in the last 20 years, as Jacques already mentioned, first of all, we will have a completely new landscape in Switzerland, 2,000 new lakes. The border of the forest will go up 500 meters, so 100 meters per degree. And the real problem is we are constantly talking in Switzerland 2 degrees more within 50 years. In the Alpine region, it will be, if it will not change, it will be 5 degrees, so it's much heavier. And you will have, or Switzerland will have enough water, but not in the right time. For instance, in Basel, Jacques, in 50 years from now, if you don't manage this landscape, you will have 40% less water in the river Rhine in Basel. And then we have to discuss it with France, Germany, we have enough, but not in the right time. And when you mention it, we asked our students, okay, this valley, what is it for? From wilderness to dams, and these new lakes, artificial lakes, not only natural lakes, after the glacier, we need it for drinking water, not for hydropower. And so, and in the beginning we thought it's too much for all the students, but then I was criticized that I do it with you, with architectural students, and then I asked, but who else is working on it? Nobody is working on it. And we had 20 years' time to think about this fallow land. And what happens now? Photovoltaic, hydropower, wind power, all in the fallow land. And now everybody's, we cannot destroy nature. Right? But they didn't take it on board, and therefore we did really this profiling on base your work in the städtebauliche Portrait. What is really valley for valley? What could you imagine as a student? What could be the future? And it's really a discussion. And Thomas, half a year ago, showed it in a Ticino village, and he was a Napoleon coming from the ETH, and you decide what we are doing here. Hey guys, you have to think, you have to decide, you have to work on it. That's the problem. They don't accept. Of course, it was. I'm not so sure that in the beginning it was really a provocation from you, but since we have you as a protagonist here, it was really. I mean, this critic or this process of abandonment is showing two things. So the urbanization is not really good, and one reason is the autonomy of the communes. No? That's implicit here, because the critique is criticizing the political system as well. What you did in the Biennale, showing how many, 6,000 or 7,000 communes, and that's one of the critiques. Nobody's really talking about it. But behind this was a real critique on the political system. For me, much more interesting than just to say it's a description of what is going on. And it's even now going on, this abandonment of the landscape.
Yes, I mean, I have to go on, but I mean, we could discuss at length about that, because I think that currently the situation gets more confrontational, actually. I mean, there is a new confrontation between those forces who really want to defend these old ways of life and old ways of operation and of politics, and the reality that is, as you said, Jacques, I mean, dramatically changing and taking somehow the territory under our feet, takes it away and changes it. No, but to go forward with our discussion, we also had not only the idea to make this analysis, but we had also the ambition to design, to develop a new kind of territorial design. So, Matthias Gunz, you were a student at ETH Studio Basel, and then you made your free diploma on exactly that question. How could we design in a different way, in a new way, these kind of landscapes? In your case, it was not the Alpine fallow land, but it was an area that we called quiet zones, and you looked at the Thurgau and how these landscapes evolved, and you tried to find ways to answer to these challenges of urbanization in these areas. So what was your response?
Well, I mean, our project, it was me and Christian Müller-Inderbizin who worked on this mainly, was a direct effect of the portrait. Some think tank in Thurgau had seen the map, and they wanted to know what to do with this, mainly what to do with these quiet zones, how to give these leftover passive spaces new energy. And I mean, how to convert analysis into project was, I think, an ongoing debate in ETH Studio Basel, and it was approached with extreme carefulness. So when we started, we didn't really know how this would go, which was kind of scary for me as a diploma student, as you can imagine. And basically, we took a piece of the map and made a zoom in, a kind of high resolution part, and then we kind of deliberately took a step back to place these entities or object within this landscape, this portrait. And this object, one was a kind of a natural reserve park, an alternative form, and the other was a street, a kind of a parkway or a rural highway. And hidden or packaged inside this project were a question that kind of came out of the book. What is the relationship of the center to the periphery? Are these quiet zones, these open landscapes, just parks for the bigger cities, or what else could they be? How can we sharpen the contrast between communes and entities? You know, where within the Swiss context of a federalist democracy, there's a tendency that everything becomes equal or homogeneous, or maybe the biggest question was if we can think of project on the scale, you know, that needs the participation of not just one commune but many. You know, I think what Günther mentioned a little bit, that each commune sees itself traditionally as a kind of kingdom of itself, and to think bigger. And I think all these things were somehow within this project, and this created a kind of a very playful but still very concrete way to start discussion in Thurgau about themes that usually had a kind of, were almost taboo to talk about. And people, we talked about things that, you know, taking away private property, changing building zones, stuff that was outrageous in a way, but we kind of sold it just as a project, and people, I think, took it quite seriously, and I think it created a lot of debate at the time.
Would you say you found a solution? Were you convinced by your proposal?
Absolutely. They just didn't realize it. Well, okay. I guess it wasn't so much about the solution. I mean, we knew it wouldn't be realized, although we pretended that we wanted to realize it, to make it kind of more real, you know, or people would take more serious. And I think, yeah, some of the ideas were interesting, or maybe have created a resonance. Yeah. But it was more about the process, about the discussion, and I think it was quite a fertile environment for us. We kind of really went around and enjoyed this role, to, you know, traveling from one party gathering to the next local club meeting, and, you know, we presented a lot, and it was surprising that there was some quite serious or earnest discussion about this kind of outlandish ideas.
I mean, that found a continuation, actually, that kind of approach. The question of how can we intervene into the landscape, how can we intervene into the urbanization of agricultural land. And that was actually the last big project at ETH Studio Basel. That was then published as the book Achtung die Landschaft, and there was a team of assistants and senior assistants. There was Martino Tataro, there was Lisa Euler, and there was Metaxia Markaki. And you're sitting here. You are finishing your PhD at the moment here at ETH, yes. on somehow similar questions about Arcadia on the Peloponnese. But so what was the approach that you developed then in this project?
So indeed, Achtung die Landschaft was one of the very last projects of Studio Basel, and it actually happened really quick. So the book itself didn't take more than 5 or 6 months, and we have to say this is also because of the immense force of the team that was part of it. Martino, Tatara, Charlotte van Moors, Lisa Euler, Jacques and Pierre. But I do think that it was really marking a turning point to this whole trajectory. So in fact, we were really sitting at this edge of a legendary tradition of analysis. And all these questions of how to read, how to analyze urban Switzerland, how to find forms, have been addressed, and they were given to us as a heritage. So now the question that was really burning is indeed how we actually operate now with the certainty that Switzerland is an urban territory. So how do we as architects operate and design in there? And how actually do we challenge existing traditions that being of maybe a quantitative approach in planning or a zoning approach? How do we engage with the complexities of this phenomena and as architects claim a space in the discourse of this landscape, which is spatial but also political quite often. So in fact, the project started with a reference of another book, the Achtung die Schweiz, which was written in 1955, and it was carrying also the tradition of the teachers of Jacques and Pierre, Lucius Burkhardt and Markus Kutter and so on, Max Frisch, which was calling for attention to the forces of urbanization that was generating sprawling in the Midland. So in fact, Achtung die Landschaft took upon this narrative but made a twist, paying a special attention to the Landschaft, so the landscape. So I would say the key strategic move or the game changer that happened in this project was this hypothesis that we started. And it was to shift the attention of the architect, of the designer, from the built to the unbuilt. So there was a key collage that suddenly eclipsed, as also Milica did in Hinterland, the built fabric, and suddenly revealed to us a whole other territory that was sitting in the shadow of these forces of urbanization that were so dominant that were attracting the attention of political discourse, of design, and so on. So in fact, as soon as this reverse happened, a whole new world was revealed in front of us, that being elements as lakes or hills, mountains, but also processes, ecological processes, social processes that were taking place in this unbuilt territory. Because unbuilt as a term was very vague, but calling us to define it more, show us all the potential of these territories. So to conclude, I think the big move and the big potential that was entailed in this project was precisely this call towards the community of architects to engage projectively with the unbuilt, to question what this unbuilt is, to question relations with the built, and address it not necessarily as a territory for planning, but more as a terrain when one can create visions, can be synthetic, poetic, creative. So exactly what it's needed basically to address this complexity today.
Yeah, I mean, that would be now the starting point of, I think, a next debate. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. But
maybe can I just
sure.
Something? I think ultimately the outcome of Achtung die Landschaft is really the built versus the unbuilt, and it was, and that's very closely linked to our experience with the urban portrait, is that perhaps in order to shape or to actively design city, to produce city, unlike a very powerfully run state, in a non-democratic country as Switzerland, you have more impact on shaping proactively the city through the built, through axes, through palaces, through monuments. All of that we don't have in Switzerland, but the unbuilt has a very strong power. It's a huge potential. Actually, this is interesting for the landscape architect, but also for the architect. That was something we wanted to convey to the students, and also still now, very often we say, if we are asked to do a study in a community, in a Dorfgemeinde, or in a master plan for a whole area, focus on the built only. So you should only be able to transform what is built and not touch the unbuilt. And the unbuilt should inspire for something else. And that's very much Lucius Burckhardt. So he was hardly mentioned, but Lucius Burckhardt, who was a teacher when Roger, Marcel, and Pierre and I, of course, were students, we were his students, had a strong influence. So there is leftovers of this thinking of the unimportant, unbuilt areas that has a very strong poetic, but also very strong creative potential. I think that was like the last month, and that continues in our daily practice in our office, to be almost something that has a very strong feedback when we ask for focusing on the built only. With all the ecological discussion and environmental impact we have today, this is certainly was a very good end of that impact we had in teaching.
Yeah, and it's the beginning of other projects. I mean, I think that's exactly the point. So now we could continue discussing these questions, but we do that already, you know. So in different projects. So particularly in our case, Milica, Topalović, and I, we also worked exactly on these questions that we call extended urbanization, and on these places that seemingly are unimportant and seemingly are just at the disposal and can just be grasped and can just be used and can just be destroyed, no? And that's really the key question today, and it's one of the absolute key question for the climate crisis, for the biodiversity crisis, and also for the looming food crisis. No, at the end, this question becomes the key question for the survival of of large parts of this planet. No. But with that, I think we make a short break, and we come back in 10 minutes. So at 5:35, we are back here for the next roundtable. So thank you very much for your attention.